Welcome to part 3 of the Concept of Design lecture, the last lecture for Unit 10. When we were last talking, we were talking about unity and the search for unity as a design concept. And next I wanted to talk about economy. The search for reduction, the search for finding the simplest way of saying something or showing something is a major part of art in general, but is especially an important design um, concept and a design principle in the 20th century. And here we have two artists. And oftentimes when we talk about economy, we'll go straight to completely abstract or completely non-objective artwork. And I wanted to pick two perceptual artists who were making imagery, looking at stuff and making imagery of stuff to show that economy is also a really important part of that way of making artwork as well. And there's some unity through the careful organization, a unity caused by the similarity of color and of value range. But there is the economy is much more careful in the Morandi. In the Diebenkorn right here, it's very economically organized, but at the same time, if you look at any single passage, like let's say this passage right here, where we're looking at some of the colors that were painted before the blade, and then some of the colors of the blade, as well as some of the colors of the negative space around the blade of the scissors, all of those kind of working together, and all the complexity of texture that's happening in there. So it's economical in some ways in terms of like the number of objects, the number of overall big organization of shapes, and in the grid structure that's being followed. But there is lots of, on a small level, lots of complexity, lots of variety. And another art principle that we haven't talked a whole lot about will be rhythm and movement. We talked about movement when we talked about dynamics at somewhere around the third week of the course, but here I just want to talk about rhythm as being one of the ways that rhythm works in works of art is through repetition and variation, by having similar kinds of shapes repeat over and over again in pathways. And if you we did this experiment in class. If you just look at this picture, don't look at the Matisse for a moment, right? And imagine your eyes moving through it in this sort of pathway, right? Maybe coming down a little bit here, you see those figures going down those stairs, then back around, coming around here, maybe then coming back around. And if you go through it that way, you might be able to hear a little bit of music, sort of an abstract, just rhythm and changes of musical tones that represent for you that pacing, because there's a very specific kind of pacing to this organization of shapes and of colors and of values as our eye moves through this space. Matisse has a different kind of approach to rhythm, which is the rhythm is much more represented not so much in the grouping of shapes and the repetition of small units, but in these large shapes, but then the repetition in their edges in the lines and the rhythm in the lines, looking for rhythm in the shapes themselves, even when the composition is made up of only a few shapes. Here's some more examples of both rhythm and of how repetition and variation can really create movement, right? In each of these, even in an image like this, which in some ways feels absolutely still, but then at another level feels very much about movement, a visual kind of movement towards the center. This this photograph here really says a lot about both how organization and composition can create both rhythm and movement, repetition and variation, like the way each of these shapes right, is very similar but slightly different as they're going further and further away. Right, Cartier-Bresson. And I think in class we didn't have a lot of time to talk about these, but I wanted to, in these we coming back to this concept of, here we have a Clyfford Still, over here we have a Robert Motherwell. And on the Clyfford Still we have a certain amount of unity created by the way he creates shapes. That's overall kind of shape, kind of a somewhere between um, drips versus paint peeling. Has a, for me, a very much like a paint peeling kind of jagged, kind of and ripped paper kind of feel to the shapes he likes so much. And there's a unity to almost all the shapes in the painting being similar that way. But then there's a huge jump in contrast between this section versus the rest of the painting, having to do with value contrast, right? And color, right? That all the color and all the value here is very, very similar. And then here we have a jump in a lot of different, we have a really, really dark color, then we have a very strong, intensely rich, high intensity mid-value color. Whoops, I went back. And then here we have that jagged little bit of white. And also, if you look at it really carefully, you'll notice that the edges of these shapes, the way these shapes are kind of breaking up is actually kind of different. So there's a lot of, there's this jump to high variety, but I think he pulls it off by having this large expanse of almost a monotonous type unity through a large portion of the painting. And then also that kind of like that white to white jump kind of helps hold things together. The unity here on the Mark Rothko, did I call it a Motherwell before? I did. It's a Rothko. The unity here on this Rothko is much more obvious, right? The color, the value range is much more limited. All the colors are much closer to each other in family, you know, and also the way all the colors are put down. There's this similarity to the treatment of all the edges, a similarity to the fact that all the shapes are these kind of overall horizontal rectangular shapes, but with slightly softened, rounded edges. And so everything has this kind of, and there's a unity to the fact that everything feels like it has this same kind of undercolor underpinning everything. Here are two more paintings that I want to talk about in terms of unity. On the left is a Cézanne painting. We talked about that in the, I guess, yeah, in Unit 10, talking about high modernism. And over on the right is a Seurat. And in the Cézanne painting, there's some real beautiful, careful organization. One of the things I love about this painting is how this tree as a mark and as a shape is very, very close to the center line. Not perfectly on the center line, but very, very close. And in some ways, it creates a certain amount of tension by being so close to that center line, but not being quite on it. But at the same time, there's a consonance that's created because of the way that mark unifies with all of this, with the rest of this hillside and this group of trees right there. If it was all on its own without that, it would be a much more anxious sort of organization. Whereas the unity and the coherence that's created in the Seurat has a lot more to do with all of the kind of careful geometric simplification and organization. There is a very deep sense of abstraction here in this painting. And by what I mean by that is that everything, even though it's very much looking at all very real life stuff, everything is carefully simplified to get as close to its essence as possible. All right, I think that's the end of our lecture. No, I have one more to talk about, which is once again about unity, about organization, right? Corner to corners, diagonals, like we've seen before, a limited palette, right? Simplifying wherever we can, finding the most minimal way of stating something. So we're talking about economy here, we're talking about unity, finding unity with variety, organizing a composition in terms of contrast, and that's where I should end. All right, thank you.